So the parasha this week, as we already saw, starts off with the story of Bahaloischa Saneros, that Hashem tells Moshe to tell Aaron about lighting the menorah. At that point in time, it's the menorah in the desert, in the Mishkan sanctuary in the desert. And then later, of course, when they would get to Israel and build the Beis Hamikdash, then it would be the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash. But the principle is the same, and that is that it's the Kohen's job to light the menorah on a daily basis. Rashi picks up that the language the Torah uses is specifically beha'aloischa, which means that you raise the lamps. So the indication over here is not just simply that you light. The indication is that you have to ensure that the flame becomes independently viable. Shalheves oila me'eleha. The flame is independently viable, which is rational. I mean, obviously, if you're going to light a candle, obviously you want to make sure that you don't have to stand there indefinitely keeping the flame going. The whole purpose of lighting the candle is that it should be able to last after you've moved on. So if that's what it's telling us, it doesn't seem like it's a major lesson. You light a candle, make sure that it stays alight. But once you start to explore a little further, you realize, hey, hang on a second. This is not only talking about the menorah in the sanctuary and the physical act of lighting it, but there's a bigger lesson beyond that too. So the verse says, Behaloischa es haneros. You have to light the neros, the lamps. Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon says, Ner Hashem nishmas Adam, that the lamp of Hashem is the soul of every single person. So that already contextualizes it in a totally different way. We're not just talking about lighting a menorah. There's a personal lesson over here. There's a lesson that is relevant to us, and that lesson is that you have to light up your neshama. That's what it's telling us. That there's an individual in the community who is called the Kohen, and the Kohen has this privilege and responsibility, which is to light up people's souls. Now, you might be the Kohen in your environment. You might have an influence over a group of people. You might be the Kohen in your personal life, right? To ignite your own candle. Or, like the verse says, Ner Hashem. Perhaps Hashem is the Kohen in a certain extent, and Hashem is the one who ignites our neshamas. Either way, whichever way you look at it, Ner, the candle, the lamp that we're talking about over here, actually is our neshama. That dovetails very nicely with the image of the menorah. The menorah was a 7-branched menorah. And the reason for that is that we're told that the human soul is made out of 7 primary areas of character. Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, etc., which effectively translate into 7 major approaches towards God. So there's the approach that is primarily based on love of Hashem, and there's the approach based primarily on fear of Hashem, etc. So there's 7 different channels of how you can connect to Hashem. So when it says you've got to light the lamp of the soul, you can understand the menorah is kind of the whole human being, including, by the way, the body, and the part that illuminates us is our neshama. Now, unfortunately, the neshama is not always an open flame. Unfortunately, sometimes the neshama is just the spark of potential. Sometimes it's like, the old flintstone that people used to use, where you look at the stone, you don't even know that it has the potential to ignite a spark. So sometimes, unfortunately, the neshama is just a little bit concealed or buried. The goal is to cause it to burst into flame. So, ba'aloischa esaneros, you have a responsibility to get the soul to burst into flame, which means that the soul will become the guiding light for my whole experience, my physical experience, my body, my engagement with the world should all be illuminated by and guided by the neshama. Now, it's in that specific context, now that we've seen that we're not just talking about the menorah in the temple, but we're actually talking about ourselves and we're talking about our neshamas. So then we can appreciate that when it says Shalheves oila me'eleha, that the goal is for the candle to become an independently viable flame. That's a message to us. It's an incredible message to us. We have to become independently viable Jews, not Jews who always rely on somebody else who's going to inspire us, inform us, etc., etc. Now, this principle of becoming independently viable, if you think about it, is very closely related to the principle of what we call free choice. It's a big topic. It's something that people are often confused by. Is there really free choice? Is there only free choice in certain limited circumstances? Does Hashem know in advance what's going to happen? Doesn't he have a master plan? So how does free choice work? It leaves people often with more questions than answers, and we're not going to go into that in this particular conversation. But what we do know is this. The Rambam, Maimonides, writes in Hilchos Teshuvah, which is the laws of how you go about doing Teshuvah, he writes quite a lot about free choice. And he says one or two things that are incredibly relevant to this conversation. Firstly, he says that if there was no free choice, life would be incredibly unfair, because Hashem says that he'll reward us for doing the right things and he will apply consequences for doing the wrong things. It would be mighty unfair if that could happen, but it's not your choice. How do you get punished for something you couldn't choose to do? So therefore he says, and this is the wording that is very important, he says, therefore it is an ikar godol. It is a fundamental principle of Judaism that a person has choice. A fundamental principle. That means it's not just a philosophical nuance. It is core to the whole of Judaism to appreciate that a person has free choice. Why is it so core? Why? So, most people tell you because, like we've just said, otherwise life is unfair. How can Hashem warn us that he's going to punish us if punishment is a thing? Right? Consequences might be a better word. But how can he say that if we didn't get to choose? If you're wired to be a particular kind of person, and you're wired to have a particular predisposition to some kind of abhorrent behavior, so how can Hashem then hold you accountable for that? He made you that way. That's usually how we explain it. The reason it's an ikar gadol, the reason it's a fundamental principle that you have to be able to have choice, is because otherwise Hashem is incredibly unfair. But in the context of this parasha and what we've just read, actually, the principle of choice is a far deeper principle. It's not only to facilitate room for reward and punishment. Actually, the goal of giving us free choice is because shalheves oilo me'eleha. Because the purpose of why Hashem created us was to become independently viable Jews. That's what he wanted. He didn't want Jews who have to be constantly plugged into the source. He didn't want Jews who wouldn't be able to think for themselves, because in that case they wouldn't be able to achieve for themselves, because in that case we would be useless. What's the value of life? Why have a soul come down into this world if it cannot achieve? So the Rambam says that choice is an ikar gadol. It is a fundamental principle of Judaism because it is the translation of what Judaism is all about. Judaism is all about the belief that we have it in us, that we can burst into flame, that we can become independently focused, that we are capable of getting our own heads right and being able to do what Hashem wants without constant external input. And that's why he says clearly, the Rambam says, that Hashem's choice, he uses the expression chayfetz Hashem, Hashem's desire is that we should be able to make decisions, our own decisions, collate information, do a due diligence, and then come to make our own decisive choices. So when over here in this parasha it talks about shalheves oilo me'eleha, that the soul, which is comparable to the candle, is supposed to burst into flame and then be independently viable, it's actually, if you wish, it's a kind of an approval from Hashem. That Hashem has said to us, you can do this. I trust you, and I believe in you, and I've empowered you, and I've given you an neshama that is capable of holding its own. Which is very nice, right? Sounds like a very nice concept. There's only one problem. The problem is that if you look through Torah literature, there seem to be various occasions that indicate that we're not actually capable and not actually independent. Now, some people really resonate with this. Like, for example, Jewish mothers, they're very happy for you to know that you will never be independent. You should always stay at home as long as possible, even when you move out. Nobody makes chicken soup like I do. But I'm not talking about Jewish experience, I'm talking about Jewish sources. If you look in Jewish sources, there are a number of sources that seem to indicate that we're not so independent and we really always need a crutch. For example, the same verse that we've just invoked, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, that the soul is the lamp of Hashem. So you could read that and say, oh, how beautiful. Isn't that amazing? Look at the imagery that is being expressed over here, that every one of our souls is like a lamp that Hashem has lit. It's very beautiful. Equally, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam sounds like my soul is only a soul and only has power and is only capable of achieving because Hashem empowers it. Ner Hashem, it's not my lamp, it's Hashem's lamp. Can you hear in that the dependence? My soul depends on Hashem. Here's another example. The Gemara tells us that every single day our Yetzer Hara rises up in an attempt to spiritually annihilate us. So that every one of us has this problem, that we have built into ourselves a voice that does everything in its power to make sure that we fail spiritually. Every day and multiple times during the day. Just do that. It's okay. It's not serious. Just do that. Or you don't have to do that under your circumstances. You don't have to do that. That's for like really religious people. Or that's for when life is working the way that it should. Says the Gemara, if Hashem would not assist us, we would never be able to overcome our Yetzer Hara. That does not sound like we're viable and independent. That sounds like we're very reliant. I can't even tackle my own Yetzer Hara. Forget about changing the world. I can't even overcome my own Yetzer Hara unless Hashem holds my hand. That sounds very disempowering. Here's another one. The Midrash tells us that there's a verse that says, Mikti mani v'ashalem. Hashem says, who preceded me? Find me somebody who preceded me, and I will, so to speak, pay them for their services. So the Midrash says, what is Hashem saying? Hashem is saying, I have never given anybody a responsibility without first giving them the resources. So you have a responsibility, he says, to praise me. That's one of the mitzvahs. You've got to praise Hashem. He says, but before I gave you the responsibility to praise me, I gave you a soul. And a soul means that you have the wherewithal to praise me. Or I gave you the mitzvah, he says, to put a mezuzah on your home. But before I gave you the mitzvah of a mezuzah, obviously, I gave you a home. Otherwise, the mitzvah would not even be a conversation. So basically, Hashem gives us all of the resources that we need in order to be able to do what Hashem wants. Think about it. There is no mitzvah that a human being is capable of doing unless Hashem first presented you with the resources to be able to do the mitzvah, whether those be the material resources to actually physically do the mitzvah, or whether it be the spiritual resources to have the wherewithal and the energy within yourself in order to do the mitzvah. So it's very nice and it's poetic and it sounds beautiful to say that Hashem believes in us. Like a good motivational speaker, right? God believes in you. He has empowered you. You can almost hear the hymns in the background. But then you read resources in the Torah, it sounds like Hashem constantly has to replenish those resources, implying that we're not so independent. So how is it possible that we could say Shalheves Oila Me'eleha, that every one of us is a soul that can burst into flames and be independently viable, when the evidence seems to suggest that at every moment we need Hashem to interface with us, to back us up, to strengthen us? Doesn't sound like we're that independent. Now, it's always nasty to leave off on a question, but we'll pick that up, please God, tomorrow.